All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachakwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations be unto the Akim out here pushing this gospel and truth and sincerity to the best of their ability given to them by Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. This is the Brother Quanah Watt come back at you, Lord will, with the edifying lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. And, I was just sitting here meditating in the spirit, man. And, I was just meditating on the mindset, right, that we have, leading up, into these times, right, leading up to the fulfillment of the last two major prophecies, right, the first and the next one, right, being Jacob's trouble, right, and the peak of Jacob's trouble being the mandatory implementation of the RFID micro CHIP, right, according to Revelations, the 13th chapter, verses 16 on down, as well as, right, the last major prophecy before the most ultimate sought after prophecy, right, which is Yahushua's coming, right, the deliverance of the elect, right, the destruction of the wicked, right. Before that is what? World War III, right, which we're ultimately approaching, very quickly, right. We see that this moment is pressing upon us, man, and as the scriptures say, right, we have a more sure word of prophecy, and guess what, man, prophecy is popping off the pages, starting with our elder apostles, right, our leaders, of Great Millstone, right, on down to the elder bishops, the elders, the Akim, right? We've been telling y'all for years that these things were ultimately, going to come to pass, right, through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shah. We've been telling y'all, and now they're here, right? So what mindset are you in, right, going into these times, right? This is 2 Peter's chapter 3, and it says, a new heaven and new earth. And when you see that, right, new heaven and new earth, it's not talking about an actual new planet, right? It's not talking about the Lord ultimately destroying the planet that we're on, right, and creating another one. No, right? When you go into it, it's going into what? It's going into a renewed, right? To renew, right? To bring back, right? Yahweh Shem Shai is ultimately going to establish a righteous rulership on the planet, right? Starting with Yahweh Shai. Right, scriptures say that the government shall be upon his shoulders. Right, it's talking about Yahweh Shai's shoulders. And then under that you have what? The 144,000, right, with King David, right, directly under Yahweh Shai, and the rest of the 144,000 in their order, being the governing presence, right, the governing body, right, of existence, right, all creation, again under Yahweh and Yahweh Shai. And then you have the rest of the elect, right, and eventually the rest of Israel, right, the rest of the Israelites, right, the ones that die on this side, right, and perish on this side, right, prior to, the kingdom being established, and then you're going to have the heathen, right, but nonetheless, right, and being servitude to the Israelites, right, but before we can get there, right, we understand that these last two major prophecies have to happen, so again, right, what mindset are you in leading up to these, to these times, right? This is 2 Peter 3 and verse 10. It says, but the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, right? When you least expect it. That's why it says in Sirach, what is that, 5 and 7, right? Make no tearing to turn to the Lord and put not off from day to day, right? You gotta get this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding now before it's too late. It says, in the which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burnt up. And it's not talking about the whole earth. It's talking about Babylon, right? AKA America, right? The sinful kingdom that has ultimately been, right, that golden cup in the Lord's hand for so long, but now we see is being brought down, right? Economically, right, the dollar is being destroyed, right, as we speak, right. All these different nations are done dealing, with the dollar, right. They're ultimately sidestepping America and these tariffs and whatnot and sanctions, right? And saying we'll do deals, right, with these other nations. You know, they might pay a little bit more, but it's going to be far less, right, than what they're paying, to America. You know, since Trump is going around being a freaking bully. You know, these nations are just done dealing with America, right, as a whole, right? And eventually what's going to happen, right? These nations are going to, right, who have once been allied with America, right, turn against America, right? There's Revelations, 17 to 16, right? Those 10 horns, right? What goes into the EU, right? The European Union, right? Germany, France, Spain, the UK, right? Belgium, Poland. If I'm not mistaken, I know Poland's part of NATO, right? But you got all those different, European Union countries, right? Who at this present time are just saying no. Spain just said that they're not going to allow America to utilize their military runways and whatnot to house or any of their military members, right? Spain said no. And for so long they've been allied with America, but again, they're saying no more. Which is that prophecy coming to pass. Again, more sure word of prophecy. And eventually it's going to lead to them shooting those nuclear missiles upon America, which is, right, these plagues that are going to hit, right, pursuant to Zechariah. Let me grab that in this one. This is Zechariah, chapter 14 and verse 12. It says, and this shall be the plague wherewith the Lord Yahweh Bahashim Yahushai will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. Now we understand that all these different nations, right, at one point, right, have had, Israel in captivity, right? But see, Babylon, right, Esau, Edom, Babylon, here in Babylon, have done worse than any of these nations. Right? Scripture saying Zechariah 1 and 15, they afforded the affliction. And they did that where? They did that here in America, right? And we know that in Numbers 35 and 33 that blood defileth the land, and then the only way that this land can be cleansed is that the blood of him that shed it be shed. Right? So Esau's got to pay for what he did, right? And the first part of that payment is what? Right? Him and his kingdom going down, right? And eventually being destroyed. Right? The second part is him going into captivity, But it says, their flesh shall consume away while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongue shall consume away in their mouth. And we all remember, right, the Terminator, where at the very end, what happened? Right? Those nuclear missiles went off, and, whoever, I think Sarah Connor was her name, right? She was holding on to that fence, and then the nuclear hellfire came and just completely disintegrated her flesh, everything down to her bones. That was a nuclear missile that went off, a nuclear bomb that went off in that movie. And see, this is right here. This is in the scriptures. Where do you think Esau gets it? Right? Where do you think Esau gets it? He gets it from the scriptures, man. But see, this is what is about to transpire, right, upon the earth, especially here in America, right? Nuclear missiles are going to hit outside of America. It's just that America is going to be the worst, is going to get the worst of it, right? Scriptures talk about 200,000 nuclear warheads, right, that are going to ultimately hit America. And the phone had to chime on that, So again, right, as we see these things approaching, right, what mindset, right, are you to be in, right? The 2 Timothy's, it's like in 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 11, it says, seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness? Now I want to break this down, right? It says what manner, right, of persons, right? What does it mean by manner, right? It says of what sort or quality, what manner of, right, of persons, right? What manner of man, right? Of what possible sort, and we understand that there's really two types of people, within the nation Israel, right? You got the wicked, right? The 2/3, right? Who, ultimately follow the ways of the world, right? Who ultimately, are gonna, you know, cave into the, the wants and the deeds of the flesh, right? And then you got the righteous, right? Those who Yahweh by Hashem Yahushua has foreordained, right, in this time to receive this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, right? To repent, to return, right, to Yahweh by Hashem Yahushua, as we read in Isaiah the 10th chapter, right, starting in verse 20, right? And they are going to be doing what? They're going to be seeking Yahweh by Hashem Yahushua in this time, as it says what, right? Seek him 10 times more. Seek him 10 times more, Salakia. That's what the elect are going to be doing in these times. Lord, will we be of that number? We're gonna seek the Lord, man. Meaning we're not going to be in the same mindset, as these people. We're not going to be operating, right, as the same as these people, right? In all holy, right, hagnos, right, which ultimately means Strong's GH40, most holy thing, right, holy, right, which holy ultimately means, separate, but it says sacred, pure, morally blameless, religious, ceremonially consecrated, right? It says what? And anastrophe, right? Strong G 391. It says manner of life, conduct, behavior, right? Your behavior starts in your mind, right? As the scriptures say, as a man thinketh, so is he. So what you think in your mind is what you're gonna say. What you're gonna say is what you're gonna do, right? If you're thinking, about, this woman, right, who ultimately has, a husband, and that, you're gonna think about it. Eventually, you're gonna say something to somebody about it, or or you're gonna holler at her or whatnot, and then you're actually gonna be giving into, so right then and there, you already sinned, right? Right, you're sinning your mind, but then you go in and doing it, right? That's you willfully sinning, man. Right? At that point, when as soon as you find out she has a woman, or if she has a man, this woman has a man, right? You're supposed to repent, look away. Otherwise, you're already committing adultery, man. Which we understand the scriptures say that he that committeth adultery lacketh understanding. But it says what? It says manner of life, conduct, behavior. Right? Again, your behavior starts in your mind. So we got to be what? We got to be renewed through the spirit of our mind. And this is what we are being called, right, to do, right? To turn to Yahweh Hashem Yahushua and to be renewed through the spirit of our mind, right? As it says right here, this is Romans 12, and it says dedicated service, right? And we have to be dedicated to Yahweh Hashem Yahushua, and we got to prove our dedication, right, by trying to keep the law, statutes, commandments to the best of our ability, right? And changing ourselves, man, right? Praying to the Lord that He allow us and give us the tools, right, and the ability, right, to change, right? You don't want to be like an old dog who can't learn new tricks. That's why Yahushua said, "Well, come to Him as what? A child, right? A child is like a sponge, ready to soak it all up. That's how we have to be, right? It says, verse 1. It says, "I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of the Most High, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice," right? Because this is a sacrifice, And that, again, that's also what we're called to do, right? To present our bodies as a living sacrifice and to glorify and to worship Yahweh Shemel Shai. And in the end, Lord will, right? We be part of the elect. We will be glorified, right? It says, "Wholly acceptable unto the Most High, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world," right? Meaning we're not going to be acting or moving, right? Because when you go to that word conformed, right? Strong's G 4964, right? Skimiatso, right? It says to conform one's mind and character to another's patterns, right? Which says be not conformed, right, to the world, meaning we're not supposed to have the same mindset. We're not supposed to move the same. It's all the way around, right? To fashion oneself according to. There you go. We can't move. We can't be the same, right? Inside and out, right? It says, and be not conformed, right, to this world, meaning you don't have the same mindset, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, right? The changing, the renewing, right? For the better. Right? Let's go into that word renew, right? Strong's G 342. It says a renewal, right? Renovation, complete change for the better, right? Because again, if we continue to, to walk in the ways of this world, that's us walking on that broad and wide path, which leads to what? Death and destruction. But if we continue to change our minds, right, and conform our minds, right, because the scriptures also say, be ye conformed, right, to the image of the Son, right, which is Yahweh Shai. So we got to follow, right, Yahweh Shai, and we got to, ultimately take on, and be like-minded, as Yahweh Shai, which is not of this world, right? Yahweh Shai said, ye are of the world, but I am from above, right? Ye are from beneath, I am from above, So that's how we have to ultimately move, right? That's the mindset that we're supposed to be on, right? Looking for, setting our affections on things above, right? Yahweh Bashim El Shai, right? That's how we're supposed to move, man. It says that ye may prove what is good, what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of the Most High. That's right. All right, let's go back to that 2 Peter 3. 2 Peter 3 and verse 12. It says, looking for and hasting unto the coming of the day of the Most High, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. Right. This is what we're looking for. Right. We're looking for this place to be brought down because of 2nd Esdras, the 4th chapter. Right. That the only way that the good is going to come, if that which is sown with evil be destroyed, be removed out the way, and we know that the Lord will remove him out the way. He setteth up kings and removeth kings, right? Hey, Yahweh Bashim El Shai is removing this devil out of power, right? It says, nevertheless, we according to his promise look for a new heavens and a new earth wherein dwelleth righteousness, right? So let's grab that word new just so we can prove it, right? New, Strong's G 2537, right? It says what? As respects form, it says recently made fresh, recent and used. Well, it says as respect of a new kind, president novel. Let's go. It goes to, right? Fresh, right? Unworn. But ultimately, it goes into, it's not given a proper, it's not given a proper definition, but ultimately it goes back to, to renew, right? To make, what is that same one? Yep. Yeah, which goes back to renew, right? So ultimately means to, to basically revamp, right? Breathe life back into, That's what it means, man. Because we understand the Lord said what? He going to have what? The kingdom here on earth, right? So, the earth, scriptures say that, the earth abideth forever, right? So the Lord's not going to destroy, this planet, So it means to renew, right? Put under it one that is profitable, right? Which is Yahweh Shai. When that's coming, man. And that's what we're looking forward to, right? We're not looking at or thinking about the same shit as these fucking people in the world. No, fuck that shit, man. We want out of here. We want to serve Yahweh Bashim El Shai so that way, we are worthy, right, to be delivered. And that's the whole goal. That's the whole goal. That's the whole plan. Right? Anything other than that, man, is just fucking vanity and vexation of spirit. But that's all I got, man. Lord will, was edifying. Lord will, straight to the point. I'm going to give all praise, honor, glory to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rechak, Wadash, double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone. Till next time I say shalom.